Good evening, everyone. We're pleased you're all joining us for Miami Jewish Film Festival's virtual speaker series live discussion with the talent behind the film Resistance. To briefly introduce myself, I'm Igor Sternberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Miami Jewish Film Festival. I'll be moderating today's conversation with the help of my colleague, Rabbi Efrat Zohar, who's the Executive Director of the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education here in Miami. Now, allow me to introduce tonight's distinguished guests. First, we are pleased to welcome Jesse Eisenberg, an Academy Award-nominated actor and an acclaimed playwright and author. His film credits include The Squid and the Whale, Cafe Society, The Double, Zombieland, and The Social Network, for which he received his Oscar nomination. Hello, Jesse.
Oh, hi. Hi. How you doing, Igor?
We are also thrilled to have Bella Ramsey with us. She's joining us all the way from England. Bella made her professional acting debut as fierce young noblewoman Lyanna Mormont in the HBO series Game of Thrones, a role that quickly became a fan favorite. Her recent work also includes starring opposite Renee Zellweger in the Academy Award-winning film Judy. Hey, Bella.
Hello.
From the crew, we are pleased to welcome Littin Menz, a renowned cinematographer who has worked on numerous international award-winning feature films, including Jonathan Jakubowicz's Hands of Stone that starred Robert De Niro, Edgar Ramirez, Ana de Armas, and Usher. It's such a pleasure having you here with us, Miguel.
Thank you. Hi.
And lastly, we're excited to have Resistance director Jonathan Jakubowicz with us. Jonathan is Venezuela's most celebrated filmmaker, whose film Sequestro Express was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the British Independent Awards and was a New York Times Critics' Pick. We're so honored to have you with us this evening, Jonathan.
Thank you. It's my honor.
We welcome all of our guests, but before we begin our conversation, I want to briefly go over just some housekeeping with everyone who is tuned into this live discussion. Given the large number of people attending this event, we need to ask that if you have any questions at any time for any of our guests, that you please type them in the chat. We will be reviewing all your questions as they come, and we'll do our very best to get to all of them. So now, let's have some fun and begin our conversation. Let's begin with Jonathan. How did you first come to learn of this little-known chapter in Marcel Marceau's life story? We know him as a world-renowned mime, the greatest mime ever, but what led you to discover and then want to tell this part of his life story in a feature film? And was Marcel Marceau's family involved in any capacity in helping shape the script when you were writing it? Did they ever come on set during the production?
Yes, I mean, the first time I heard that Marcel was involved in saving children in World War II, I was as shocked as most people when they hear about it. I obviously knew him as a mime, but I had no idea that he was Jewish. I had no idea that he saved children. So I started doing research, and it was at the time that I was about to premiere my film Hands of Stone at the Cannes Film Festival. So since I was going to France, I started researching to see if I could meet somebody that was involved or was close to Marcel. And I was able to track down Georges Loinguer, who was the head of the Jewish Boy Scouts of France. He's the guy who invites Marcel into helping the children in the castle. He was 106 years old when I met him in Paris. And a lot of what you see in the film came directly from his testimony. And I honestly, he was completely fine mentally, and we spoke for about an hour, and I honestly couldn't think of anything else I could do with my life after that conversation before I was able to get this story told to the world. It's unbelievable that it's never been told, and I was really inspired from the beginning.
And Jesse, how did the script of the thousands you must receive ultimately get in front of you? And what was your reaction when you first read it? What made you want to embrace the challenge to take on and play this difficult role?
Well, yeah, actually, when Jonathan sent me the script, he sent, along with the script, he sent like a side-by-side image of me and Marcel Marceau. And I was shocked because I looked exactly like him. And then I had no idea that he was Jewish. I certainly had no idea that he, you know, did this unbelievable thing in the war. As Jonathan said, like it was very, you know, no one knew, or, you know, very few people knew. And when I started like looking in, you know, researching him, you know, outside of the script that Jonathan had sent me, I realized why we looked alike. Our families come from the same little area in Poland where my grandparents are from. I think it's like an hour's drive from where his father came from. You know, he's you know, in the script, he's presented as kind of a young, indulgent artist putting on his, you know, little plays for an audience of unappreciative distracted people. This is my life entirely. And I grew up with a mother who was a birthday party clown for a living, and she painted her face exactly in the style of Marceau. I didn't put all these things together until I read this great script and saw these two pictures. And then just as a, and just to answer the other part of your question, I just loved the way Jonathan wrote this story that was about an artist coming to terms with his art through helping other people. You know, this was not a typical Holocaust movie where, you know, the attractive German businessman is saving emaciated victims like Schindler's List, or when a guy, you know, is this kind of using his brute strength to heroically help other people. This is a guy who is the least likely hero, who's an artist, who's using things that we would never assume would be helpful to anybody else to save lives.
Jesse, you've obviously played characters from real life before, but what was it like trying to become this particular character who's also a real life artist?
Well, you know, a little kind of acting shortcut is if like you're playing a real person, the shortcut is to take 2 or 3 things from that person and use those things, and then the rest leave to your imagination. And it will give the audience the kind of satisfaction they would have from watching the thing that they're aware of without distracting them with a kind of impression that you'd see on a sketch comedy show or something. So with this, I watched a ton of videos of Marceau and, you know, noticed the way he talked about his art and noticed the way his French culture affected, you know, his, you know, sense of self and the way he spoke. I took kind of those things, this kind of like indulgence that I would attribute to either being French or being the best in the world at your particular art form. And then just kind of used my imagination of what a guy like that would be like. Jonathan puts it really well sometimes. He says, you know, Marceau thinks that the war is happening to him and inconveniencing his life, as opposed to being this, you know, apocalyptic world tragedy. You know, he sees this as kind of like an annoyance at first. And so I'm kind of using my imagination to imagine, like, what would life be like that where you would think that, you know, we know in hindsight that the war changed the entire world and killed, scores of millions of people. But at the outset of it, it just seems like when the coronavirus struck here, you know, we all just felt like, I can't believe I can't do what I wanted to do next week. And that's the feeling at the outset of things when they're not immediately and urgently horrific in your face.
And I want to just speak to the end of the film. Was that performance that occurred for the American soldiers based on an actual real event? And what was your experience performing in that scene, and how do you remember it looking back on it right now?
Well, yeah, that performance is based on a real performance. The real Marceau says that his first review as a performer was in the Stars and Stripes newspaper, which is the American military's newspaper. He performed, after the war, he became a kind of translator with the American Army, and he ended up performing for Patton's troops. We filmed that scene that you're referring to, where Marceau is performing for these American troops. We filmed it in Nuremberg in an arena that was not finished, that was built for Nazi rallies. It is the biggest arena. It even rivals the American Airlines Center. Is that a local reference or something?
American Airlines Arena, where the main
arena. Okay, got it. Yeah. Even rivals that, if you can believe it. Anyway, so it was very eerie to perform this thing, you know, in this place that was built to, you know, for the destruction of, you know, my relatives and the people I'm playing in the movie. But it also had this really magical kind of, you know, I don't know, surreal metaphysical experience, quality of a kind of revenge. There's a great line in the movie where Marceau says the best revenge we can have essentially is to help these children survive. The best way to resist is to not fight, but to save children. And in a sense, that's kind of what we were doing with the scene. Here we were performing a Jewish story in this arena that was built to kill the Jews, you know, or at least to celebrate the rhetoric of those who were killing the Jews. And so it had this kind of perfectly historical feeling of a kind of beautiful, non-violent revenge.
Was your mom on set at any point?
What's that?
Was your mom on set at any point? Did you have any?
I see. You must have notes there. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. My parents flew out for that scene because my mom is my dad lost, family in the war, and my mom was a birthday party clown. So what better scene than this thing where I'm actually performing in my mother's, kind of makeup. This story about, this guy who lost his family in Poland, like my father. So I wanted my parents to be there for that at least. And they watched, takes. They were standing next to Jonathan, so I didn't see their reactions, but I think they were happy to be there. It was the kind of thing, if you're lucky enough to be in a movie, like this, that has some kind of personal meaning for you, you want to kind of try to celebrate all the things that are so personal about it.
And Jonathan, why did you think that scene was so important to not only include, but to end your film with? It feels strange in a way to see American soldiers receiving their entertainment with a mime's performance, and not with a Playboy Bunny performance like iconically depicted in Apocalypse Now, right? Why did you decide to finish the film with that particular scene?
Well, that was exactly the reason. I when I heard that Marcel did that, it was very interesting to me to imagine the situation, but also there is nothing less likely as a war hero than a mime, and the notion of having General Patton of all people introduce this war hero to then discover that he's talking about mime, I found fascinating. But the fact that then he completely connects with the soldiers, it really shows you how universal this art of Marceau is, because he went through the same experience than them in many ways, losing family and risking it all to save lives. And they really communicated with him. And I just found it and a very important, bookend for the whole thing. And it also, in a way, brings the story home to America and to a grand audience that really hears this story and understands that there was maybe not a happy ending, but there was a liberation at the end of this journey, and not only the saving of these children. In the end, we did survive. We were liberated, and Marcel was always very grateful to the American military for liberating France, and he said it many times. So I thought it was a very organic way to pay a homage, to him and to everything that he believed in.
And Bella, the film opens with you, with the scene of you saying the Shema, saying the prayer before you go to bed with your father beside you. Can you talk a little bit about your preparation for the role?
Yes, so I really just wanted to get immersed in I guess the character and what it means to be German and Jewish in Nazi Germany. So we kind of, me and Jonathan really helped develop a kind of backstory, and I asked him loads of just crazy questions, such as what's her surname, what's she like at school, just questions just so I could build up this sense of who this person was. It was also helpful to I went to a Holocaust museum locally in the UK, which helped I guess that really helped again immerse me in it and make me realize what we were actually shooting and the significance of it. So yeah, that was my main preparation. And then when we actually got to Prague, I remember we went Jonathan took me to this a really beautiful synagogue in Prague, and again that was just that kind of again just really helped with the whole becoming a German during Nazi Germany, to actually have an experience of going to a synagogue, which I'd never had before. That really helped.
What was the feeling on the set when you were surrounded by such horrors sometimes, Bella? What was it like being on such a set, and how did you leave it without carrying that horror with you?
I mean, it was very intense and very emotional because it's such a personal story as well. It just gave it even more weight. So I felt, I wouldn't say pressure. I never really felt pressured, but I felt like I really needed and wanted to make sure that I did it well and to the best of my ability. So it was, yeah, definitely like a sense of focus and emotion and like high emotions. But I just kind of threw myself into it, like without being scared of the emotion and the vulnerability. And that's why I like sets. They're such an open place to explore like emotion. And then, yeah, as soon as Jonathan said cut, I just kind of smiled at the camera to get me out of it, and also to let everyone else know that I wasn't like completely traumatized. So yeah, that was kind of how I balanced that.
And Miguel, can you talk about the look of the film and share your thoughts behind creating its color palette? What were some of the conversations that you and Jonathan had in pre-production as to what you wanted the film to look like? Were there any photos or photographers that you studied for reference?
Well, one of the most important reference was, of course, Marc Chagall, that we discussed from the beginning. And we remember, Jordan, that we walked to the LACMA Museum,
Yeah,
to see an incredible exposition. Was a particular exposition that was,
yeah, there was a Marc
6
Chagall.
months of, yeah, and was so impressive. And personally, also, I looking to visited the photographer, the Hungarian photographer, Brasai, who is, I don't know, is amazing with the light. So yeah, that's the most important influence for the color. And of course, we start discuss with incredible production designer Thomas Vaught to try to put every single color that Marc Chagall used in mostly the 90% of the places that we saw in the film. I mean, on the rooms, on the streets, I mean, not copy the painting. It's just to use the color what he used. So yeah, and for me personally, one of the most important influence was a photograph, anonymous. Sorry, my English is still very bad. But I can use Jonathan like translator. I found a little photograph for kids on the streets, and the photo, I don't know the name of the photographer, is very anonymous, and is one of the major inspiration for every day. Every day I on the morning I try to look the photograph again before we start on the set, because it's I don't know, I have the photograph here, but I don't know how I can show you. But it's so lovely. It's kids around the, ¿cómo se dice? Una toma de agua.
By a well.
Yeah, with the stars on the road, and it's very impressive. So yeah, that's.
And Miguel, what was one of the most challenging scenes that you had to shoot for this film?
Well, the forest at the end was amazing, and also the Congress Hall, the last sequence also, that was very emotional, and because it was not just made the sequence. It's for me, it was also like a political and artistic act. In the same place that in all times that the fascism appears, that night we built something, something special, so life, that is kind of to say that the life is more important than the dark side, So yeah, that's one of the most challenge that we shouldn't. Was big, so we used a lot of lights, cranes, preparing for months. So, but everything was incredible at that moment, especially because Jesse made incredible performance that night. Incredible, we cried. And he laughed, and we cried. I said, "Why you cry?" Wow, because this is incredible. And he laughed. I was, remember Jonathan and me just, give a hugs and cry. I'm very happy. And he laughed. So that moment was incredible.
Wow. So I have a question. Right now we're in the closing hours of Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, and it's this date in Jewish history where terrible things have occurred over and over and over again. The destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, the second temple in Jerusalem, and all kinds of other the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. So many awful things have occurred on this particular date, which is why we thought it actually would be an educational moment to talk about this particular movie, which really deals with the tragedy of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. And I wanted to ask Jesse first, and then maybe Jonathan, to just tell us a little bit about your upbringing as a Jewish person, and also what you knew of the Holocaust even before you actually did the research, I'm imagining, to go into this role or to do this movie. What did you know? What did you learn? How did you grow up in terms of all of this and your own Jewish identities?
Jonathan and I had very, very different. I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, in an area where I just assumed the entire world was Jewish because everybody I knew was Jewish. And it actually kind of made me resentful because I didn't like being part of, the hegemony, as it were. So like I kind of was like I always felt frustrated. I was desperate to like seek out, other people and other cultures, and also like the popular kids at the school I went to happened to be Jewish. Like, so in my worldview, I had like an entirely skewed worldview of what Jewish culture and history was. As an adult, I realized Jews were this like alienated, marginalized culture in every place, getting kicked out, maligned. But from where I was from, it was the exact reverse. They were like the, popular. So I had like so once I ended up transferring to a performing arts high school in New York City, and it was an inner city New York school. And suddenly I was like the minority. And then that's when I started appreciating my culture. This happens all the time, especially, whenever you become, I forgot what the adage is, but it's something along the lines of, when you are, when you're victimized, you become that much more, nationalized. It could evoke that as opposed to evoking the opposite, making you hide. You could evoke a kind of righteousness. And so then, but just briefly, then I started becoming interested in my Jewishness because it was something that was unusual. It was unique to me at that school. And it coincided with spending a lot of time with my aunt, who was in her 90s. She just died last year at 108. And she became like a mentor to me in my life. Now, she is born in Poland and lived there until she was 9. And she connected me with family that we still had in Poland, survivors. And I started becoming obsessed with my family's history when I was in my early 20s. And I started writing plays. The first play I wrote was about my cousin who survived, who still lives in Poland. And I became obsessed with my Jewish history. And I would ask my dad all the time, why don't you know about this stuff? And he said, my dad never told me about it. My dad, who lost every single one of his, cousins and aunts and uncles, never talked about it because he was so mortified. So, my grandfather never talked to my dad about it because of some kind of survivor's guilt. So my dad didn't know any of the stuff that I was discovering on my own, even though my dad is a brilliant, curious person. He just didn't know anything about his family because that generation, his father's generation, never talked about it. And so I became, in a way, like the kind of conduit to my family's history, telling my parents about their own parents' lives. I figured out where my mom's parents are from, this small town in Moldova, and did the research. I traveled to all these places with my wife. And so, and I started writing about it. So I became much more, I would say, like culturally and historically in tune as an adult. As a kid, I dropped out of Hebrew school because I didn't want to have a bar mitzvah, because where I grew up, you probably know this in Miami too, I hated these like parties where they have disco lights. I just thought the whole thing is so stupid and shallow, and the kids, they want money, and all that stuff kind of disgusted me, and I don't understand it, and it's not becoming a man, and I don't know, all that stuff. So anyway, so I rejected all that stuff, and only as an adult have I become like much more curious about it and interested. And now, and I've been with my wife for a very long time, and you know, she recently lost her parents, and that has kind of connected her, as it often does, to, you know, your ancestry and to your faith. And so we're becoming, you know, we're finding ways to, I guess, you know, be more religious, or at least more appreciative of our culture. Jonathan has a far more interesting, well, just a more, it's a story that, well, it was just more interesting to me, but please take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, my family, both my sides of my family were also Holocaust survivors. They went to Venezuela escaping post-war Poland, and made a very good life in Venezuela. They both became university professors, and you know, Venezuela had a small Jewish community, but influential. But we did knew we were a very small minority. You know, it's a nation of 30 million people, and we were, I think, 40,000. But it was welcomed, and Venezuelans were very open to Jews, and there was not a lot of problems until 1998, when Hugo Chavez became president and everything changed. And then, you know, all these stories from my grandparents became real. You know, the notion that you have to keep your luggage packed because you may have to go seemed impossible growing up in Venezuela. And then indeed, I actually literally had to go because they opened a trial against me because of my first movie. And, you know, we're asking for 6 years of jail for and accusing my movie of being part of a Zionist conspiracy to overthrow Chavez, even though the movie was about a kidnapping in Caracas and had nothing to do with Jews or Israel or anything. But you know, it definitely brought me closer to my ancestors and to my grandmother, who was still alive at the time, you know, and was, you know, witnessing the whole thing with a lot of pain. But I was always curious about it. I was very close. I am very close to my aunt, who inspired the role that Bella plays in the film. Her name is Elizabeth, like Elspeth, and she survived the war in a Catholic orphanage as well. And because I couldn't find a specific testimony of a kid that was saved by Marcel, instead of coming up with a character out of nowhere, I decided to base it on another Holocaust survivor, who is my aunt, and it's a story I know really well. And she was actually, at some point, she was married to Elis Borowski, who was the head of the American Foundation for Yad Vashem. So the Holocaust education that I received was directly coming from Yad Vashem, and I was always very intrigued and thirsty for information, because you know, from the beginning, when you learn about it, you just can't understand it. And I really studied it a lot. I never really thought I could make a movie about it because of how emotional and personal it was. And the reason I fell in love with the story and made me think that I actually could do this movie is because it's not about extermination. It's about salvation. And it's an inspiring story that shows about, you know, speaks about taking responsibility and saving other people. And I felt that it was unique enough to be worth, you know, making another Holocaust movie when there's so many that are so good. But it was mostly about that, you know, and it was definitely the process of shooting in Prague, where my grandfather went to school, and the process of shooting in Germany, including German crew that were working with us, was extremely emotional. My wife and I, my daughter, we were living a few blocks away from Hitler's apartment in Munich, you know, and so the process of making the film never felt like making a film. It constantly felt like a direct communication with those who came before me and those who were killed, and it always felt like a creative revenge against the Nazis. You know, we're here and we're doing this, and we're inspiring people with a tale of survival and defiance against all odds.
I want to jump in because we have an audience question directed at you, Jonathan. The question is, how much detail was written in the script about miming? and then it's followed with a question to Jesse, and I'm reading this verbatim. Jesse, did you have to do miming camp?
Miming camp.
There was, there were some, there was the specific stuff with the bagel and the candles was in the script, because we wanted to get to the point where they blow and in a way instigate walking against the wind. But everything else that happens in that scene was something that Jesse worked on with his mime coach, and there was a lot of improvisation within what he had learned, and interacting with the children and seeing what worked with the children and what made them laugh. What was in the script was very abstract, and very poetic. Always knowing, I did a boxing movie, you kind of write placeholders knowing that you're eventually going to shoot something that is going to be better than whatever you are writing. And it was sort of the same here, other than the specific character moments, like the flower, and the bagel and that stuff was definitely in the script.
Right, yeah, just to continue from what Jonathan said, yeah, so like Jonathan had written out these scenes that required certain elements, but then this, my mime teacher who Jonathan found, his name is Lauren, he kind of choreographed these routines based on his studies with Marceau. Lauren studied with Marceau for years in Paris, has become a chronicler of Marceau's life. He has video footage that no one else has, images that no one else has. And so I had, kind of like a boot camp, as the questioner implied. Yes, so I had like 6 or 7 months of just kind of focusing on these routines, and then also kind of learning about mime, learning the history of mime, how it became popularized, in quotes, I guess, by Marceau, how the kind of discipline it took, and then kind of like understanding and appreciating the abstractness of the art form. And so it was a really wonderful education. Like as an actor, you kind of, and Bella knows this kind of thing well, especially having done like these unusual projects herself. Like, every time you do a project, you spend like a week and a half kind of like learning this weird thing, and then you forget it. This was like the only time I've ever really immersed myself in a project where I spent so much time learning something that I feel like I'm maybe good enough to be like amateur, because I had to look like I could be great. I developed a skill that like is probably really mediocre, but through Miguel's technical prowess, makes it look better. So yeah, it was a great experience. I have a young son, so I still do stuff for him, and it's really a beautiful art form that transcends language barriers, and in the case of my son, transcends age, and in the case of a lot of Marceau's work, transcends comedy and drama, and is just this kind of beautiful, oftentimes very funny form of communication.
Jesse, in the scene, in the train scene specifically, between Marcel Marceau and Klaus Barbie, I think it's one of the most powerful moments in the movie. It's so tense, and it feels like it's filled with this kind of great white knuckle tension. Can you talk a little bit about your process of working on that scene with Jonathan? Do you know if that episode actually happened in real life? And to you personally, what do you think is the meaning behind the scene?
Well, the scene is really wonderful on the surface in that it's like the kind of two opposing figures in the movie meeting up. So just in terms of like traditional story structure, it's really great. But I think it has some other really wonderful elements that transcend just movie scenes, which is that like, it's this really wonderful scene where you have two competing ideologies. You have a guy like Marceau who kind of prizes his own rebelliousness, who comes from a family where you learn over the course of the movie that actually has broken the rules. He's the son of a butcher who has a secret desire to sing. He's a guy who performs his own one-man shows. And so you see this kind of ideology that I would attribute to to Jewish culture. You know, it's obviously not exclusive to Jewish culture, but it is a part of Jewish culture, whether it be questioning things, whether it be a love of the arts, whether it be kind of finding ways to express oneself as opposed to kind of just conforming to a large mass. And you compare that to the ideology that Klaus Barbie is bringing into the scene, an ideology of strict rule following and adherence to autocratic dictators, repression of any kind of self-expression that deviates from the party line. And so you see not only the hero and the villain of the movie talking, but you also see a conflicting ideologies. And and then I think the other great aspect of the scene is you see the kind of strange and bastardized humanity of this guy who is, you know, one of the world's great evil people. And yet you see that he also cares about his family. And I think what that does in a way is, which is probably true, you know, because this guy was known to be charming and, you know, attractive. And, you know, he talked about, you know, kind of finding his, this Nazi Klaus Barbie, you know, found, you know, he found his own, you know, that he self-actualized when he put on the Nazi uniform. You know, all these things are very kind of personal things that we can all relate to, not self-actualizing through a Nazi uniform, but, you know, caring about one's family, and how terrifying it is that this guy is not an automaton, but actually a feeling person. And doesn't that make it that much more terrifying to know that an ideology can sweep through even normal, occasionally compassionate people and turn them into monsters?
Jonathan, do you want to add anything to that? It feels like you consciously, when writing the script, had humanized Barbie, as Jesse had said in that particular scene, and that you did not portray him as a two-dimensional monster, as many other films have of Nazi persecutors.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely important to understand that the Nazis were human beings. You know, if we are ever going to be truthful to the notion of never again, the first thing we need to acknowledge is that it could happen again. And the reason it could happen again is because it happened because of human beings decided to do this. And I was from the beginning, when you were doing research about Barbie and his trial, one of the things that I found fascinating is that his daughter was present in the trial every single day and gave interviews and denied the charges and said he's a good man, he's a great father. And, you know, I believe that that's what she believed. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that these were humans, these were not aliens, these were not a group of people that took over a nation. This was an entire nation that was believing in this ideology. Barbie felt like a hero and was considered a hero by everyone in his nation. And I think that's very important because it is the key to identifying what can lead a society into barbarism, because it's human. You know, humans are capable of this level of evil. And I think in that specific scene, which at first you think it may be a strategy that he's doing, you know, to get the truth out of Marcel, when you realize that he's actually interested in his daughter learning about the arts, I think it's far more scary, you know, that when you realize that true evil is human, you know, is when you truly have something to worry about.
This question is to everyone, including Miguel and Bella. What was it like to work alongside the child actors? And I'm assuming they were all non-professional actors.
Well, for me, like they immediately welcomed me into their group. They all already knew each other. But I mean, they weren't professional actors, but they were actually more professional than some professional actors in how they understood completely what they were doing, what they were saying, like the importance of it, and how they like presented themselves and conveyed that. Like I felt the same as them. Like I was the same as them. They almost had a deeper understanding of it than I did. So yeah, to work with them was, I mean, I absolutely loved it. I didn't have a clue what they were saying half the time because they were all Czech. But still, it was, yeah, for me, it was a really like good, but also like inspiring experience to be working amongst kids like this.
And Miguel, what was your experience trying to capture these child actors in your camera?
Same that, I mean, was wonderful. And I have the lucky that I shot 3 films before with a lot of kids also. So I want to know a little more how manage them. But the kids in particular in this film was amazing. They was very smart. I remember one of the most complicated sequence at the forest, and they need to run in some specific place, and everyone's the whole crew was madness about how we're gonna do this, how we can make this. It's impossible. And Jonathan take the kids to the monitor of the camera and say, look at the camera, you need to walk specific, like in this path. And they do it in one shot perfectly. So they was very, very professional and very, concentrate, and was marvelous experience.
And a question to Jesse. When you were acting as Marcel Marceau, how challenging was it to have to act sometimes not using any words and just having to express yourself with your body and your gestures?
Well, I mean, it's a relief. He, in the scenes where Marceau uses mime instead of dialogue, it's for like a specific reason. Sometimes it's to perform for kids that are too young to understand verbal communication. Sometimes the kids don't speak the same language. I mean, Marceau probably would have been speaking Yiddish to these kids. They were German, he was French, but there would have been a language barrier. Sometimes it's to keep kids quiet, where if you speak, it would be fatal. And so as an actor, you're kind of always just looking for a purpose. Why am I doing X? Why am I chewing this gum? Or why am I, in the case of this, saving these children and not talking? So it always felt like it had a purpose. Jonathan said that, each scene where there's mime serves a different purpose. Sometimes it's, in one scene, like in the most like active scene, it's to get the brother to kind of use his, clown or mime skill to like save the brother that's been arrested, and so he gets the flame and blows it at the guy. Another time it's to keep kids quiet in the tree. Initially it's to entertain the children. And so as an actor, it all felt totally, or to perform for the woman he loves. All of these had a kind of different purpose, and as an actor, that's all you're looking for. And so, even though that's not my skill set, and it was new to me, it all felt like it had a reason. And once anything has a reason, I mean, I don't know if there are actors watching tonight or whatever, but that's all you need. You just need some kind of reason to behave in this way in this moment, and it's easy.
There's an audience question I want to throw in to piggyback on your response. The question is, what did your mom, Jesse, think of your miming? Did she approve of it?
Yeah, my mom loved it. So she performed as like a birthday party clown for kids. So she was kind of doing, she would like paint her face like Marceau. She was kind of like a mime from the socialist hippie era. And so she was kind of, everybody would win a prize. She, that kind of ethos. And so she was kind of performing stuff like that. But she loved Marceau. She went to see him a few times. I mean, Marceau performed, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 300 nights a year or something like that, right? Performed all the time?
Yeah, the whole year, barely took a night off. It was unbelievable. Yeah. And for like 11 years straight, it kept that pace, it was unbelievable.
Did he perform in Venezuela?
Yeah, 4 times.
Yeah, because here too, I'm in, central Indiana, and people saw him here. I'm in southern Indiana. People saw him here too. Everywhere I go, people know that I'm in the movie. They say,
well, one thing in regards to Miami, we screened the movie there at the Miami Film Festival at the Olympia Theater. And while we were screening it, the person who worked at the Olympia Theater in downtown and has been working there for 30 years told us that Marcel Marceau performed there for 2 weeks, every night. So it's unbelievable. He really went to every corner of the world, and he made a point about that. He wanted to communicate with the entire world. He did.
Yeah, I saw him in Boston when I was growing up multiple times at Symphony Hall.
Wow. Wow.
Jonathan and Jesse, this is a question for you both. Can you talk a little bit about the scene between Marcel and Emma, the scene when Emma is kind of desperate to avenge her sister after witnessing her tortured at the hands of Klaus Barbie? To me personally, it seems like that particular conversation between Marcel and Emma is one that presents a sort of dichotomy between being selfish and selfless, about receiving the satisfaction of avenging one's loved one versus doing the harder thing, and that's being able to move on and choosing to save lives. In your film, Jonathan, you choose the selfless act of saving lives. I think it's an interesting discussion when taking into context Hollywood film culture's traditional revenge narrative. Do you, Jonathan and Jesse, want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, to ways to resist are something that are always tough to consider, you know, when in front of Nazism or any dictatorship, really, because it's always so difficult to really create harm. And what I think, I didn't see Emma as being selfish for wanting revenge. I just felt it was the natural, brutal reaction to any human being whose sister was just killed in the most horrific way. But what I found important about Marcel convincing her that you gotta choose life. You know, you cannot become your enemy when there is a reality where you can save other people. And it's counterintuitive, because when you're harmed, you need to fight back, and in a way our culture celebrates fighting back and celebrates revenge, and you know, there is a merit to not being, you know, accepting being hurt. But I think history proved that those who decided to be selfless and renounce their primal urge to fight back and decided to focus on saving themselves and saving other people were right, because the Nazis were destroying entire armies in weeks, you know, and civilians never really were able to harm them. And the right thing to do at the time was saving these children. And the fact that Marcel can see it so clearly, I think is part of what makes him heroic. We actually shot that scene in Nuremberg the night after the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue in the United States. And it was very emotional for us to be shooting a scene that specifically talks about the importance of saving lives in front of horror, when in Nuremberg, the city that most represents the Nazi movement and the revenge that was taken against the Nazis when they were taken to trial, making the case that Marcel is making all the more evident. But the day after, Jews were killed in Pittsburgh for praying in their synagogue. So it was very emotional, and I think part of the emotions that you see in the scene were derived from that.
This is a question, an audience question to all of you. And the audience member is asking, would you either make or participate in another movie sharing these similar themes? To anyone who wishes to answer. It's addressed to all of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a challenge to do a movie about this period because there are so many done. And so, like, you know, the fact that this movie was about like an artist, as we discussed earlier, like the fact that this movie focused on another aspect of it, I thought made it totally transcend the kind of tropes of the genre in such a great way. You know, but you know, there's also a great movie that some of the other actors in this movie were in other good Holocaust movies that also took it from a different angle. There was a movie called The Counterfeiters that Karl Markowitz is in. He played my father in the movie. That's a really good movie. It's in German. And it focuses on this strange, very, this little known but strange story of these people who were counterfeiting the British pound, who were tasked with doing that in a concentration camp. And Geza, who plays George in the movie, he was in Son of Saul, which is also a kind of a unique take on a Holocaust movie. But we didn't really think of it as like a Holocaust movie. It doesn't take place at Auschwitz. It's not, you're not seeing the kind of victimization that we're normally used to seeing, or at least the aesthetic of that kind of victimization isn't in this movie. It's really more of a story of like an artist kind of coming to terms with his own craft through helping others during this horrific time in history.
Anyone else want to respond? Or Jonathan, would you make another film sharing themes similar to this one?
Yeah, I mean, themes for sure, because I think themes of this film are also, you can find them in a lot of places, in a lot of conflicts. And whether if I would make another World War II movie, I could, I mean, if I find a story that's as unique as this one, I would, I didn't think I could until I found this story, so it really depends on the story and what it says. And if I feel that, the story hasn't been told, I think so, I think the era is incredibly interesting. I think it speaks so much about the world, not only of the time, but also of today. In a way, the Nazis were the archetype of figures that keep coming and popping in different parts of the world. Sometimes it's so evident that it's abuse, and they call everybody Hitler nowadays. But I think it's very important to revisit that war, because it's very specific and unique. And if I ever find a story that's set in the world that I feel is worth telling, I will do it for sure.
Yeah, I'll say, in my opinion, watching your film in today's climate, in the climate of the rise of intolerance in the U.S. and in Europe, really made the film have a lot more at stake beyond just mere entertainment. There's another audience question that I think it was you, Jesse, who provoked. They're asking, do you have a photo of Marcel that resembles you, Jesse? And they were asking, why, Jonathan, did you choose not to end the film showing that photo?
I'm sure we have that photo somewhere. I didn't want to end the film centered on the figure of Marcel only, because in a way the film ends as a celebration of all this group of Boy Scouts that ended up saving close to 10,000 children during the war, and the film is dedicated to the million and a half children that were killed. And I think the movie in itself is enough of a homage to Marcel that it didn't need the picture. I didn't think that it needed another image. It's also a bit of a cliche in movies about real people, and in a way we weren't making a biopic. We weren't making a movie about Marcel Marceau. We were making a movie about a specific moment in his life that helps you understand who he was as a human being. I feel like there is perhaps another movie or another TV series about his career and his contribution to the art, and that's the movie where you would put the picture in the end, because it's the body of work that you're celebrating.
And here's another audience question. They're asking, how aware were the child actors of the significance of the Holocaust? And were any of those children Jewish themselves?
Yeah, they were extremely aware, and they were extremely Jewish. The fact is, we were looking for kids and auditioning every professional actor kid in the region, and I wasn't finding what I was looking for. And I told the casting director, is there a Jewish school in Prague? And she said, there is, but they probably don't speak English. And I said, I don't care about them speaking English. I just want them to, feel this story. And we went to the Jewish school and we auditioned, and it was very fascinating because a lot of the kids came already in wore makeup and wore clothes and really immediately from the beginning care about the story. And we chose most of the children from two classrooms, so they also knew each other and got along really well, which ended up being very helpful. And then we took their parents to dinner and we spoke to them, and quickly realized that it's inevitable that when there are Jews in the Czech Republic, they come from Holocaust survivors. That's the region, and we shared the script with them, and they were extremely moved, and they said that we will make sure our children understand how important this is for them and how much this is the story of their grandparents. And it was incredible on set because you ask them to cry and they cry. You ask them to be happy and they're happy because they knew where to draw the emotions. They knew this was their story. And I think there was only some stunt kids were not Jewish, but the rest were from the same school, and they were also very inspired by Jesse and had an incredible dynamic with Bella, and the whole vibe on set was amazing. When we were shooting in the castle, they were sleeping in the castle, so it was a little bit like a Harry Potter experience for them, and it was great.
Wow. This is very moving. I have to say, the fact that they really understood what they were doing in a deeper way than an average acting child is just very moving. So I have a maybe it could be a final or a second to final question that would be for Bella and for Jesse. There is that theme in the movie of a parent who had their own aspirations to become a performer, but suppress that because of expectations, society pressure, whatever that backstory was. And there's sort of that parent-child conflict issue that was the backstory to Marcel's life. And I'm just wondering, for Bella and for Jesse, you're both actors, did this ever come up in your own personal life with your own parents about their expectations for you and what they wanted you to do versus what you wanted to be and become in terms of your own choices? So maybe Bella, you'll begin.
Yeah, well, my family have always been very just do whatever makes you happy and will support you, which is pretty cool. So I mean, obviously there's the fear that comes of their kid being suddenly exposed to the world. So there's been that, but it's always been, I've been quite fortunate that it's always been within just support and care rather than them trying to steer me off to do a proper job, if you like. So yeah, I mean they're just gonna support me whatever. Well, so they say, which is good.
That's great. And when you say they were afraid of exposing you to the world, were they just sort of scared of a movie set and how sophisticated that would be and maybe you'd grow up too quickly?
No, it's more the fact that it's more the fact that people strangers know who I am. That's the scary bit for them, and also for me at times that there's people out there who are we got no idea who they are, and they're I've had marriage proposals in my DM on Instagram, which is these crazy aspects that come with suddenly being exposed, which I guess that was kind of I guess we've kind of got used to that now. It's just about managing it, really. You can't really hate it because that would be foolish, but loving it is dangerous. So it's just finding a happy medium.
Great.
Here's one final question to all of our guests. Jesse, Jonathan, Bella, and Miguel. Can you talk about what's next for you? But more importantly, can you talk about what it's like releasing a film in the time of quarantine?
Yeah, it's been an unusual experience. We've done a lot of talks like this that we probably would not have been able to do if it was a more traditional movie release. And so it's been really interesting, and I've really loved it. I've heard, this is the first time Miguel's been on, but I've done it with Jonathan so many times and Bella a few times. and it's always like nice to hear about it from, you know, my colleagues. That's an unusual experience we don't get to have. I don't like going to the movies because I have all sorts of inexplicable anxieties. And so I don't miss that aspect of it. And my therapist probably does because I haven't been there as much because I haven't had to confront that fear. So, you know, yeah, so it's been like a nice experience out of something that, you know, would have been probably most likely disappointing.
Well, I want to thank all of our guests for giving of their time and participating in a Miami Jewish Film Festival's virtual speaker series. We're so looking forward to seeing all of you in your next projects. We also wish to thank all the listeners, fans, everyone who tuned in tonight. We encourage you to find the film on VOD or on Blu-ray and watch it if you haven't already done so. And make sure to tell your friends, tell your family members, and tell your neighbors about it. And lastly, we want to thank IFC Films and Tamar Simon from Mean Streets Management for your support in making this event possible. We thank everyone and hope you stay safe. Good night and good luck.
Good night. Thank you.
You.